right, welcome to another episode of The Maker's Bar. I'm your host for today, Jennifer Loading, and we are so thrilled that you are here today. And we have a fabulous guest tuning in all the way from India, which I think is so awesome, across the world. And we're going to get to chat with him today. Gaurav Arora, he is a master certified coach. He's got a lot going on. He just told me he's been doing podcasting forever. So I am so excited to chat with him and learn about him and how he's making a difference. So welcome to the show, Gaurav. We're excited to have you here today.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure being on this show, Maker's Bar. And I was very intrigued by the term Maker's Bar. And thank you so much for sharing the story behind Maker's Bar and why we are bringing leaders together, why we are bringing people together so that they can have conversations and they can get to know each other, why they are doing what they are doing. Super thrilled. Thank you.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the great things about, let's back this up for a second. Who would have thought like 20 years ago, we could have plugged in on a video call, around the world to talk to people. And then not only that, get leaders on a place where they can have conversation. I think this is the coolest part about what we get to do is that we get to tune in and plug into people all around the world that are making great things happen in their lives and for the people around them, and to collaborate, share ideas. And so I think it's just a cool thing that we have the technology now to be able to do all of these things.
It is. I'm sure somebody would have given a thought to that. That's the reason why we have been able to enjoy the benefits of what you just spoke about. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about you, because that's what this show is all about, what you're doing, what you're creating, manifesting. I was looking on your LinkedIn and kind of digging a little bit on the internet to find out who you are. It looks like you've just got a lot of really neat things going on. So maybe start with what it is that you do. And let's just start there. Let's start with what it is that you do.
That's a phenomenal question. And thank you so much, Jennifer, for asking that. For as long as I've known myself, I've always called myself as a work in progress. When I started working with a bank, least did I expect that one day I would be doing something that I'm so passionate about, because at that point in time, I didn't know what I was passionate about. And I'm nowhere saying that today I've been able to decode all the answers for myself. Having said that, I run my own company called X Monks. X Monks stands for the warrior monks. And the name is inspired by the 10th Guru of Sikhism, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Guru Gobind Singh Ji said, he coined a term called Sant Sipahi. That means saint soldier, somebody who's willing to pull the sword in service of others. And from there, we got inspired. And the company that I run, it's known as X Monks. We call ourselves an ecosystem that brings to you world-class coaches, leaders, thought leaders, business leaders, various walks of life, for personal transformation and leadership development. So that's what I am engaged in right now.
I love it. I like that you said ecosystem, because I think that's so important, right? Like that's like getting the right people in the community to create this growing, elaborate thing. I think ecosystem is really good. I had a gal on a different show a while back, and we had talked about that, creating ecosystems, within corporations and stuff like that, the importance of all of that. So I like that you said that. So do you actually have coaches working in your community as well in this, that you're able to align with the right people?
Precisely. So there are different set of work that we are involved in India. So we are partners to a couple of international companies where we provide their services, the certifications in India. That's one part of it. We are involved in doing leadership development and executive coaching, both in India and abroad. I run a mastermind where we bring some really senior, cool coaches coming together, exchanging their ideas, sharing their challenges, understanding each other, and providing the support in all possible shapes and form. And then, of course, I have a podcast. We have our coaching magazine in India. I think that's the only coaching magazine that we have in the country. We have a conference called the Coaching Conclave that we run. It's an annual conference that we have. So everything related to coaching. If you want anything related to coaching, you are at the right place.
I love it. So it sounds like I'm listening to all of this that you're talking about. Here in the States, we have so many of these I call them coaching gurus. I love them all, but you hear like John Maxwell, and then you got like Tony Robbins, and you got all these names in the coaching industry. So it sounds like this is kind of what you sort of are in India. This is like this you're kind of a big deal there in that coaching space.
I would restrict myself from calling myself a big deal. What I can tell you with a lot of conviction that I got introduced to the world of coaching quite early. At that point in time, India was at a very, very nascent stage when it comes to coaching. I was at the right time, right place, right opportunity, and here I was ready to pick the momentum. So I don't enjoy calling myself a certified coach or the different credentials that you have. However, I've always called myself as an evangelist of coaching. And as an organization, we are on a mission to make India the coaching capital of the world.
Yeah.
Now, that's what we are moving towards. Can we have a lot of coaches just supporting each other, where there's no one guru, where we can find a master in each one of us? Now, that's the intention.
I like it. No, and I think that's great. And I think it's showing I want to say like the humbleness that goes with this, right? Because I think in all of us, we have some ability to mentor or coach, right? And whether we step into that is a choice, but I think we all have
Precisely.
that, and I feel like we all have life lessons to teach. We all have something we've gone through, and just some people enjoy that coaching space. So I think that's awesome. I love what you're doing. Like I said, you're doing a lot of speaking as well. I went on the internet and I was looking around at some of your things. And so it looks like you've had, ample opportunity to go around, to speak at different events. And so tell us a little bit about that.
Jennifer, as I said, that I'm a work in progress. And I firmly believe if somebody would have to write a book on what grace can do to your life, I'll be one of the perfect examples.
Yeah.
I don't call myself smart. Neither I'm smart nor I'm talented. However, I've definitely been a blessed child. Starting from the family that I was born in, the siblings that I've been blessed with, the friends who surround me, the colleagues that I have, the partners that I get to work with, and the customers even who tend to treat us like their partners. So in all shapes and form, I would call myself a very, very lucky individual. Having said that, in the recent past, I've been invited to deliver a keynote speech for one of the organizations who are the leading manufacturers of cables in India. Then I spoke about the importance of coaching and what coaching can do for today's leaders in one of the HR conferences that happened in the country. Then I was involved in as a panelist, where we spoke about the importance of context and how that impacts listening. Yeah. So these are the different topics that continue to intrigue me. I'm fascinated, curious, and the more I take a deeper dive into all these subjects, I think the more I realize that I'm a perfect example when it comes to what grace can do to you.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that too. And I love that you've said several times this work in progress, right? Because I've often talked about that as well, is that, I think, I don't know how it is there, but here, it's like you go through education and a lot of times you think, okay, I've got the education, right? Like I have the degree or I have what I'm supposed to have. And that's like the finite line, right? Like, okay, we've learned the material, and yeah, we might brush up a little bit, but we've kind of learned the material. And I think what you're talking about is a lot of what I talk about, that we recognize that not only in our work, but as human beings, we're consistently evolving, we're learning, we're continuing to grow and move forward. And so I love that you've said that several times. You've talked about grace and you've talked about this evolving. And I think it's interesting. I was telling someone just the other day, and all of the work that I do with the coaching, I was in the network marketing space for 22 years. So I feel like I have been coaching women forever. But when I went into my own practice, this was a new theme because I had to really go into a new arena and rebrand, right? But it's interesting because I keep learning. You're talking about learning these new things, right? Like context, you're bringing it, talking about that. And so the other day, or I guess the last month, I started looking into this neurofit, which is nervous system regulation. Because I've been into health and wellness for years. And so now how we bring the two together, right? Nervous system regulation and your coaching, they really all come together when you start to think about regulating the nervous system and how it helps you show up better, but also accelerate your goals and your productivity. And so I think it's interesting that we continue, those of us that are really love what we're doing, we continue to keep diving into this and keep learning and keep sharing, but we recognize there's no finite end to this. It is a continual
Yeah.
process.
Absolutely. And Jennifer, thank you for bringing in the reference of nervous system. The other day I was talking to a friend of mine, and this guy is an expert when it comes to storytelling. He's an expert, and he primarily works with leaders, and that too in the world of startup. Now he says it quite in a very pure, in one of the finest ways possible. He says, one of the basic responsibilities of a leader is to manage oxytocin and cortisol in a room. And I was like quite intrigued by what he was talking about. He said, Gaurav, let's try and understand that. In a room, when you are present, you have to ask this question from yourself. Is your presence creating more oxytocin in the room, or is it producing more cortisol in the room? And the moment you find that there is more cortisol in the room, that's when you have to regulate your own emotions. Because at the end of the day, in case you cannot manage these two different hormones in the room, you'll not be able to lead that team effectively. And I was quite intrigued. I said, what is required? He brought in some beautiful concept of, hey, are you able to connect with people at the empathy level? Because when you're able to connect with people at the empathy level, the overall production of oxytocin would go up. And the moment you bring in some kind of suspense, that's going to increase cortisol in the room. And you have to play with that. Because when there is cortisol in the room, there's some kind of tension in the room. That's where people are sitting at the edge of the chair, biting their nails. And that's where you have to create a surprise. People say, wow. And that's where the production of dopamine will happen. Now, how are you balancing oxytocin, cortisol, and dopamine? Empathy, surprise, empathy, suspense, and surprise.
That's great. So, yeah. I never heard it quite put that. Thank you for sharing that. For anybody listening to this, that is so great to know when you're presenting. But I think anything, like if you had to sit down to do a sales presentation or anything, that's a great to know. And it's interesting.
Absolutely.
Because I had worked with a mentor. I've had mentors for many years, but I had this particular mentor I worked with for 2 years. And we were actually talking about the psychology and sales and learning how to navigate. You mentioned context early on, like how do you develop the sales process along the way so that when you get to the end of this, it's superfluous. You're no longer having to make that call and put somebody on the spot that's not your client. You're finding the right people and doing the right things to get them to the end. And so all of this that we're talking about, I feel like just sort of kind of really sums, it really rounds all this out. But to get back to what I was saying, I think it's the continual growth that I think makes this so great, this space that we're in. And I love what you're doing. I would like to know, first of all, this is kind of a great thing. I mean, when this came about, when you decided to go into this entrepreneur space, because I don't know about you, but like when I was born, my parents were entrepreneurs. So I kind of grew up in that sort of entrepreneurial mindset. Yeah. So I kind of knew at a young age, I'm like, I want to be an entrepreneur. But I had no idea what I wanted to sell. Like, I don't know. I was a kid. We're going to sell crafts, right? Yeah. Did you know at a very young age that you wanted to do this entrepreneurial landscape?
Jennifer, just to share a secret with you, it's no longer a secret, but let me just share that one more time. I don't even consider myself as an entrepreneur today as well. Probably the assumptions that I had and the assumptions that I have for being an entrepreneur, they don't sink in. Gotcha. With the identity that I hold true for myself. I got into entrepreneurship, if you call that as an entrepreneurship, by chance. I was working with one of the organizations. Here's this guy. He said, hey, why don't we start together? You are good at sales. You are good at connecting with people. You are good at expressing yourself in the situation that you are in. Why don't we start something of our own? We'll be doing things that you love, that I love. I said, hey, that sounds fascinating. Let me just jump into that. Now, as per the norms of the society, that was the birth of an entrepreneur, if you call that entrepreneurship.
Right.
Now, the journey continued. I met some really amazing people. We got to partner with few of the best companies from different parts of the world. We brought them and their work to India. If you call it entrepreneurship, let it be. I would call it partnership. I would call it working with people that you feel like working. And I think that's how, one step at a time, one step at a time, I continued to walk. And as I was walking, people started joining. I started loving people. I started loving what I was doing. And if you call it entrepreneurship, okay, let's call
Yep.
it
You can
entrepreneurship.
call it whatever you want to call it. It's fine by me.
Yeah,
But I will say this, what I love about what you talked about is a common thing that I find with a lot of leaders in the business, that are running their own organizations, is that a lot of them sort of fall into that. Not all of them, some kind of go out and they seek, but I think the ones that truly are passionate about what they do, they sort of fall into those position. So I always talk about these nonlinear paths. And it's so interesting,
yeah,
when you meet people, they'll talk about, yeah, I was in accounting before, or I was in finance, or I was in this, and then something came about, right? And I think the beauty in life is when you're able to find that passion that you love. And you don't, we used to say in the network marketing world all the time that when you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life again, right? Like you just love it. So it sounds to me that's
bang
like
on.
what you're getting to do.
I have not worked for over 18 years now.
I love it. It's great.
Not even a single day, not even a single day. This is 12 o'clock midnight in India, and
I
I
was going to
can talk
say you
about this
are up
subject.
late tonight to do this interview. I am so
I,
impressed.
c- I can talk about this subject for another 8 hours and then run another 8 hours session to talk about the same stuff.
I would love it. I do want to ask you some fun questions kind of about you've mentioned people, you talked about, falling into this, loving what you're doing, grace. We've talked about all these great things. Culture within your organization, because I think culture is a big topic, and I think you either get it or you don't, right? Like there are companies that have great culture. When I built a high ticket program, and one of the things I talk about is culture, and that's the beginning part of that program. And I talk about Mary Kay because Mary Kay had great culture. I talk about Zappos because Zappos had great culture. And I find those leaders, they're different kind of people, those ones that create that great culture. I would love to know from you, what do you feel like has been maybe the success, like what that one thing you did or one thing you created that has kind of kept that culture supported that you've been talking about?
Yeah. So thank you, Jennifer, for asking this question. I will tell you what it means to build a good culture through the lens of a leadership consultant. And then I will also talk to you about the challenges of building the same culture that I was talking about, that I
Yep.
would be talking about.
Yep.
Challenges through the lens of an entrepreneur. Would that help?
Yep. Absolutely.
Last year, I was working with a lady. She used to work for one of the biggest social um, media organizations the world has witnessed. And I asked the same question from her. I said, hey, what's the secret behind the good teams that you have been able to build, the strategic initiatives that you have been able to create, the innovation the organization has been able to make? She told me, hire the right people and build the right culture. Hire the right people, build the right culture. Sounds quite intelligent if it's written in a book. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story, what does it require to build a culture? Now, I personally define culture as what people speak, right? The language. You can pick up a culture in any organization by the language people use and the behavior that they demonstrate. Now, one of the themes that I've been working on is that as an individual, we all have these three basic desires: expression, connection, and contribution. I should repeat that: expression, connection, and contribution. If you don't express, or if you don't connect, or if you don't contribute, you would experience a sense of suffocation within. And wherever you have expression, connection, and contribution, you will experience peace within, and you'll also have a sense of expansion. Now, just imagine when you are expanding, there is a journey between shunya, which is nothingness, to expansion. And when every time when there's a journey between the shunyata, the nothingness, and the expansion, we start to vibrate at a very we start to vibrate at the higher level of consciousness. That's where people start to experience what it means to have oneness. Now, that's what the culture of the organization ideally should be. Now, that's through the lens of a coach, that's through the lens of a leadership development consultant. Now, through the lens of an entrepreneur, have I been successful in building the same culture of expression, connection, and contribution in my organization? My answer is no. I have failed very successfully. Why? Because I don't express myself fully and completely because of the fears that I have within myself, that in case I tell the truth, the person who's performing really well might not work with me any longer and might leave me. And that's the fear that I carry within myself. And that's where I feel suffocated at times. And when my team members witness me not confronting an individual that I need to confront, they don't feel connected with me at the deepest possible level. They would respect me that he's a nice guy, he's a kind guy, he's forgiving, he's compassionate. But deep down, what it means to connect with the other person, where I can confront you, where I can challenge you, and I know that you would not carry any kind of resentment against me. I don't think that I have that with my team members as well. Now, wherever there's no expression, there's no connection, forget about the contribution. So, as an individual, as a leader, leader is also an overrated word, I believe. I think as a team member in my team, I've not been able to express myself fully. I've not been able to connect with all the team members um, with utmost sincerity and authenticity. And definitely that I'm not been able to contribute. And if I'm not been able to contribute, Jennifer, it will be really unfair for me to expect
Right.
to live from that space, because at the end of the day, a team is a reflection of who you are as an individual, as a team leader.
Right.
And I don't have any right to point a finger at my team members when I know deep down I am feeling suffocated on several occasions in my organization. I might have the right intentions, but the hidden commitments of holding the image that I'm a nice guy is killing the overall productivity of an organization.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So,
Well, I think, listen, the good in this, because a couple things I will say. One, I think, again, go back to ongoing process, right? Like, this is a process. And I think I know you're familiar with the Johari window. I always like to talk about it because I think it's so powerful. I think one of the number one thing is recognizing our blind spots, right? It's knowing where we're good and where our strengths are not as developed. And I think that that's what this process of being, and I know you said leader is an overrated word, but however we want to put that word of influence, being able to have impact and influence, right, is a continual process. And so thank you for sharing that, because I think that you expressed that very well. And I think that gives somebody, because I think this is a common thing for a lot of people. A lot of companies are like, how do we get this culture right? Like, how do we do this? And even I, in all the years I built teams, I will tell you, if I knew then what I know now, I'm like, oh my gosh, things would have been so much different. I was in that organization for 22 years building teams, and I can't tell you how much chaos and drama we had going on in those teams. And now I look at it and I laugh, because I think that would have never even happened now, because we wouldn't even been doing it. I would have never even allowed that to happen, So I think this is a process that we learn, but I appreciate you being authentic and sharing that and giving just laying that out, giving direction.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. I think that's the only way. When I say that I'm a work in progress, I genuinely mean that, because unless I'm willing to accept my own reality, unless I'm willing to embrace the truth about my own self,
Yeah.
I would continue to struggle. And as Ram Dass says, it's only the truth that's going to liberate you.
Right.
But finding that truth, embracing that truth, accepting that truth is difficult. And yet, unless I do that, I'll not be able to embrace the humanity, and I'll never be able to become the warrior monk that I've been talking about.
I like the warrior monk. I love it. It's great. So You said a lot of really great things here, and I think we could probably pull this out, but I do want to ask you how do you define success for yourself and for your company? What does that look like for you? What makes you feel successful in those two areas
Success for myself and
for the organization
for
as a
the
whole?
organization. I just have to define it, right? I'm not
Yeah,
sure
just
if I'll be
you can
able
say
to
whatever
get
you
that.
want.
I'm not
I
sure
know
if I'll be able
sometimes
to
that's a hard
get that.
question.
Yeah. Jennifer, I have a conversation. I have a podcast tomorrow.
Okay.
And there's this lady coming who is considered to be one of the most accomplished ladies that the startup world looks up to. And for the last 2 days, I've been biting my nails. I've been experiencing some kind of anxiety within myself, some kind of nervousness, some kind of fear. And I was asking myself, where is this coming from? Because in the past, I got to work with her. And to my mind, I felt that the lady does not acknowledge the value that I bring on table. And that's my story. That's my story. She has been extremely kind all the times. Every time when I ask for any kind of support, she's always there. And I was talking to myself that, hey, shucks, man, I've been doing this kind of work for so many years. I've had the pleasure of working with few of the best leaders, C-suite executives in the country and worldwide, that many would give their left arm for. And yet I have this insecurity that I'm not being accepted. The lady does not accept, does not appreciate the value that I bring on table. So one of the questions that I had for myself that I would be asking her is, how has success, the definition of success, changed for you when you started your journey to where you are today, where you are among the top 50 most influential ladies in the world, one of the top executives in the world, traveling the world, you have your own fund, you have your own organization, and blah, 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 blah. Success for me is where I'm comfortable in my own skin without putting the other person ahead of me or below me,
Mm,
where I could be a still pond in front of 1,000 people, where I could experience equanimity at every moment of the day, when I could be the real warrior monk, when I know how to pull the sword in service of others, when I have the maturity about when to speak and when to hold silence.
mhm.
For me, that's the definition of success. Will I ever be able to get to that space? Hopefully, in a couple of births and rebirths. And I'm okay to continue to be the work in progress. But one thing is for sure that I've improved as an individual. I've become a better individual, better human being in the last decade or so that I'm happy about. So, yeah.
I love it. So I love this, and I wanted to say something as I'm reading this book right now called Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima, and she was a founder of It Cosmetics here in the States and ended up selling it, I believe, for 1.2 billion to L'Oreal. It was like the
Wow.
biggest. Anyways, long story. She was adopted. She ended up rejection after rejection. Anyways, the whole thing she talks about is this. It's about being worthy, right? And how she goes into this whole first chapter is what I think the first chapter is the best chapter I've read so far. I'm halfway through the book. That's my favorite chapter so far. She talks about the difference between self-confidence and self-worth, and how a lot of times we use those words interchangeably, but they're not really the same thing. Self-confidence comes from the skill that we gain, right? The talent, the work that we do, we learn skills. Self-worth comes from our regard, how we feel about ourselves. And she
Wow.
talks about this story about Oprah, how Oprah had given her her phone number, and she took, I can't remember if she said 3 years, 4 years, but she took a long time to actually make the phone call because she did not feel worthy enough to actually make the phone call. even though Oprah had given her the phone number. And so I'm listening to you and talking about this, and you talked about, wisdom of knowing when to speak and when to step back. I think that is a wisdom thing and a maturity thing, right? It's always a work in progress. I say it for myself. It's something I strive for all the time, is knowing when to let it, walk away. But I think all of these things that you're talking about, and you're talking about, this podcast, we've all been in those places, right? We've all been in that moment where we know our stuff, but now we're in a position where we're with somebody and it's different. It feels different, right? And so thank you for sharing that, because I think that people a lot of times forget that no matter how many skills we obtain, things we do, we all have those moments where our self-worth is a little bit fragile in the moment, right? Like we start to doubt
Beautiful distinction.
How we're showing up, right? And that's why I think you've said it so nicely when you said you like the human you have become in the process. It's this journey of continuing to evolve.
Yeah. Thank you for creating this beautiful distinction, self-worth and self-confidence. I talk about that unless you have the right container to hold your talent and the skills, you would continue to struggle throughout your life. So the question that I need to ask myself is, what context am I living my life from?
It's good.
All right. So thank you for sharing that.
So awesome. I love it. Well, this has been so fun. I mean, I feel like we could talk forever, but I know it is late for you. It is your nighttime. And I'm like I said in the beginning, I'm so impressed that you showed up here today, because I don't know if I would have been quite willing to be on midnight. But listen, I get it. I can tell you're passionate about what you do. You're making a difference. You're changing people's lives. And I think when you're called to do something and you're growing and you're serving other people and you're living, within your core values, as we mentioned earlier, I think you're coming from a different place, right? You're coming from the place that you don't see it as a job. This is your life passion and your work.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's been great. So if our audience wants to get in touch with you, maybe they want to, learn a little bit more about you, find this podcast, where do you want to plug them into?
I'm very much present on LinkedIn. I have this podcast called X Monks Drive. We are present on Spotify. We are there on iTunes. They may want to follow the kind of work that we are doing on YouTube. I have my own channel on YouTube as well, where I get to interact, learn from a few of the best leaders of our times. I've had the great honor of recently interviewing Dr. John DeMartini, Dr. Marilyn Atkinson, Bob Anderson, Richard Barrett, and few of the best leaders of our times. They are extremely generous in terms of sharing their wisdom and their experiences on the podcast called X Monks Drive. So would love to have all of you on my podcast. And Jennifer, thank you so much for being a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful host. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. And thank you. Like I said, thanks for coming on here, at the dark hour to share with our audience. And I wish you much success and good luck on this upcoming podcast interview that you have coming on. You're going to do great. It's going to all be good. You're going to do great.
Shukran. Thank you.
All right. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And be sure you hit that subscribe button and follow the X Monk Drive podcast so that you can learn more and gain some more wisdom and keep up with what is happening with Gaurav. All right. Take care.
Thank you, Jennifer. Take care.
You too.